Hey everybody, Caleb here, and today we're jumping in and we're talking about how to write a sermon for junior high youth ministry. Now, this is something that I've realized, there aren't necessarily a lot of topics on it, so I want to be able to talk about it as somebody who's been in junior high ministry for about 3 years now and has gotten to do at least a few messages, just talking to junior hires and being able to preach to them. And so if you're somebody who is in youth ministry who's getting to teach and preach to junior hires, I just want you to know this is a learning experience. It's something that you're going to get a lot more comfortable with as you're just jumping in and you're getting the reps of being able to teach and just be able to help pour into the next generation. And so if you feel like you're just needing some tips right now, I have a couple of thoughts I'm going to share with you, but by no means are these going to make it perfect. What's going to make it go well is just you being faithful with it and you continue to press on. But let me share with you guys the most important things that I have found when it comes to preaching to junior high age ranged students. It's an awesome group of people. Let's jump on in. If you haven't yet though, subscribe to the channel. We have a lot of different kind of content coming out, so make sure to do that so you don't miss out on anything at all. But let's jump in and let us talk about this. Now, when it comes to sermon writing, there's a lot of great resources out there for that. My encouragement is find an outline that you are comfortable with. You know, Andy Stanley has his me, we, God, you, we, me kind of a formula. That's amazing. I found some articles talking about how Pastor Judah Smith goes about writing out his sermons. Find one that you like, that you enjoy, that works with how you think. That's the biggest thing. I think sometimes within preaching, we talk about finding sermon outlines and we think, well, what's going to make the most sense for everybody else? If it doesn't make sense to you, it won't make sense to everybody else. So if you're somebody that struggles within certain constraints when it comes to writing a message, make sure you're finding what fits in your lane, because when you start to communicate, if you're not being clear and focused, then it's already going to fall apart. So number one, find your outline. Find the way that you're going to be able to communicate well. Now, when it then comes to translating a message to junior hires, and that's actually the way I think about it, it's translating it. Not because junior hires don't get it and not because they don't understand the topics. They understand the concepts. They are hearing them and they are processing them. They can handle some big thoughts. It just matters about how you're presenting it. And presentation is not about making it necessarily simpler in the sense of trying to cut out the meat of it. It's actually getting rid of the fluff so that it can be straightforward and can just be very clear. So you find your outline and then you're sitting down and you are translating it from whatever context you might be in. You might be somebody who might be upper 20s. You hear a message, you might write a message out and you're like, man, this is a good word. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's an amazing sermon for your age group. And you might then go and you're preaching it to junior hires and you're like, that kind of fell flat. Why did nobody stay plugged in? I know that I can preach well. You can. You're preaching well, though, to your age range. So take some time and translate that message to the junior high level. You might write a message and it might typically have 6, 7 points. Well, narrow it down to 3. You might have a message that normally would have 3 points. Maybe you narrow it down to 2. Make it where it's like, here's the big deals. Here are the big things. Here are the main 2 things I want you to walk out of here having, and that's what you're going to be able to nail home. Also, be willing to use some form of imagery within your messages. That's a huge thing that I've started to make sure to do, and it's been a very beneficial thing. So for me, I'm not an illustrated sermon guy. I'm not somebody who's using necessarily a bunch of props and things like that. I, though, am somebody that loves analogies. And so if I'm doing a point, I'm going to find a way to have an analogy, a word picture that's going to depict what it is I'm trying to teach. That's not a new thought. It's not a new idea, but literally finding it where it's like, I'm trying to teach the simple truth. What's a word picture for it? Because that student, then that junior hire, they're going to be able to wrap that concept instead of just being theory. It's like, oh, I can see how that works. So your messages might be falling flat because you're not doing some things like that, having analogies in your message. Also, do not just try to be funny. I think that's actually one of the biggest things that happens for junior high pastors is they go and they just are like, oh, I'm just going to be funny the whole time, trying to tell jokes. You are not a comedian. Can I just encourage you with that? You're not a comedian. You might be somebody who's funny that can do stand-up. That's great. But when you are preaching, you are a pastor, and own that. And students will respect that. But take time to preach, not just get up there and tell a bunch of funny stories and jokes. Use stories. use jokes as appropriate to set up and make sure you're being personal, that sort of a thing. But once you're into the message, just preach the word and preach it strong, but preach it at a way that they will understand by, again, making sure big points, making sure that you're being able to use some analogies, some word pictures, things like that. They can be funny, that's cool, but making sure that they're locked in and they're focused on the bulk of what you're talking about. Also, my last big tip for preaching a sermon to junior hires is do not get outside of the window of about 25 or so minutes. For some of you, you're like, that's already so long. Here's the deal. If you're sitting down to do your message to junior hires and you have an introduction, let's say you're introing it and you have a funny story. Let's just be real. You're going on that funny story for 7 minutes probably. As much as you want to say you're not going to, you probably are. So you do that for half of your time if you're trying to do a 15-minute message. You then have 7 minutes to be able to share a truth out of the Bible, out of Scripture. That really isn't enough time. So take time to give yourself that breathing room to say, hey, 20, 25 minutes, that's going to be the most engaging 7 minutes of introduction ever. Like, you're just going to be locked in, you've practiced through that, you've been practicing your transitions, and then you're going in and you're hitting on your couple of points really, really well. You're giving very clear direction. This is what this message is on. This is what the sermon topic is. By the end of it, you ask them, what was tonight about? They're not remembering the funny story you said. They're remembering it was about, we're in a series right now on victory. It was about experiencing victory because of the gift of Jesus. I had a message the other week I was talking about victory over fear and how my wife scares me a lot. I did not want the students to remember just that I get scared by my wife a lot. And you know what? Some of the students, that was the main thing they remembered. So I kind of didn't do a good job at pointing them back all the time, because the hope is that they would leave being like, oh yeah, Caleb's scared by his wife a lot. The message was about how Jesus gives us victory over fear. And so, for you, make sure the point of the message is being clearly spoken across the entire time. Students are understanding the big points, and also that you are comfortable talking and speaking on what you're doing. Because when you're in that time constraint then of 20, 25 minutes, you're not spending the entire time speaking just what the Bible truth is. You're setting it up so they're ready to listen, they're ready to engage, and then you end up with that about 20 or 15-minute window of really teaching them the important stuff, the vital stuff, and that's a great amount of time. Students do have that much attention span, just so you know. YouTube videos that Generation Z are watching, most of them are in that 15 to 20-minute range. Your students have that attention span. Stop thinking just because people keep saying that we have attention spans shorter than a goldfish, that does not mean that they can't listen to a message. That means you need to stay engaging, because they are watching on their phones. They are watching Instagram videos. They are watching, yes, like TikTok's a big deal, but again, look at it. When they're on YouTube watching videos, they can stay engaged, because people like Mr. Beast, people like PewDiePie, all these different YouTube artists do a good job at keeping them engaged, and they know what the video was really about at the end of it. So do the same thing. Don't be afraid about preaching for a little while, but don't go way too long. And so those are my tips for you guys about how to write a sermon for junior hires. Be confident, have an outline that works for you, and be willing to integrate some of those analogies and things like that. This is just like the very bare bones of what I kind of know to share. If this is something you want more of, please comment your questions down below. Let's continue to make content that you guys actually need and appreciate, that sort of a thing. Thank you for checking this out. Like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and I will see you tomorrow.